Pain. Blinding, unbearable pain. Nathaniel Sterling gasped awake, his body jerking as if he'd been struck by lightning. His head throbbed, sharp and unrelenting, like shards of glass piercing his skull. Where was he? The room spun around him, soft, golden lighting, a massive bed with silky sheets, a scent of vanilla, and something familiar lingering in the air. But nothing made sense. Then, a soft gasp. His eyes darted toward the sound, locking onto a woman standing at the foot of the bed. She was breathtaking, long, wavy brown hair, hazel eyes filled with something unreadable. She clutched the edge of the bedpost, her knuckles turning white. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're awake." He swallowed hard. Who was she? A jolt of panic coursed through him. His mind was blank. No memories, no recollection of who he was or how he got here. But the worst part, this woman was wearing a wedding ring. And so was he. Nathaniel's throat went dry as he stared at the ring on his finger. His pulse pounded like a war drum. "Married? To her?" He forced himself to speak. Who are you?" The woman's face fell, her hazel eyes darkening with pain. "I'm your wife, Amelia." Silence. Heavy, suffocating. Nathaniel shook his head, his fingers gripping the bedsheets. "No, that's not possible." His voice was hoarse, unfamiliar even to himself. "I don't remember you. I don't remember anything." Amelia took a slow step forward, her hands trembling. "You had an accident, Nathaniel. A car crash. You've been unconscious for almost 2 weeks." He struggled to sit up, his body protesting with sharp pain. He glanced down, noticing the faint bruises on his arms, the bandages on his shoulder. 2 weeks? Amelia nodded. "The doctor said you might experience memory loss, but they weren't sure how much." His mind spun wildly, trying to grab hold of something. Anything. But it was like reaching into darkness, his memories just out of grasp. Amelia hesitated before sitting on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to force it. Your memories might come back with time." Nathaniel studied her, trying to push past the void in his head. She was beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of nervousness, like she was hiding something. And then he asked the question that sent a shiver down his own spine. "If we're married," he met her gaze, searching for any sign of deception. "Why does it feel like you're afraid of me?" Amelia's breath hitched at his question. She quickly masked her expression, but it was too late. Nathaniel had seen it. That brief flicker of fear. She forced a small smile. "You just woke up from a coma, Nathaniel. I'm not afraid of you. I'm just relieved." Liar. Something inside him, something instinctual, told him she wasn't being completely honest. But how could he call her out when he didn't even remember who he was? He exhaled sharply, pressing his fingers against his temples as a fresh wave of pain surged through his head. "Where am I?" "Our home," she said softly. "We live in New York in the penthouse, but the accident happened outside the city." Nathaniel's gaze flicked to the enormous room, luxurious, yet somehow impersonal. It didn't feel like home. His jaw tightened. "How did it happen?" Amelia hesitated. "Too long. You were driving alone late at night. Your car lost control. You crashed into a ravine." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "Alone?" She nodded. "Yes." But there was something in her voice. A hesitation. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He didn't know why, but every cell in his body screamed that she wasn't telling him the full story. His fingers curled into the bedsheets. "I need to see a doctor." "You've already been seen by the best specialists." Amelia reached out, placing a gentle hand over his. "You just need rest." Nathaniel pulled away, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I need answers." The tension in the room thickened. Amelia looked away first, exhaling slowly. And then, in a soft voice, she said something that made his blood run cold. "Some memories are better left forgotten, Nathaniel." Nathaniel wasn't the type to take things at face value. At least he didn't think he was. Something deep inside him resisted the idea of simply accepting what he was told. He swung his legs over the bed, testing his strength. His muscles ached, but he could move. "Good." Amelia quickly stood. "You shouldn't push yourself. I'm fine," he cut her off. "I need to see more of this place." Maybe it'll jog something. She bit her lip but didn't stop him. Instead, she silently walked toward the door, holding it open for him. Nathaniel stepped out of the bedroom and into an elegant hallway with high ceilings, gold accents, and walls lined with expensive artwork. It was like walking through a billionaire's estate. They passed a living room the size of a ballroom, furnished with designer couches and a grand piano. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a breathtaking view of New York City. This was his life. It felt surreal. But the strangeness didn't stop there. As they moved through the penthouse, Nathaniel noticed something odd. There were barely any personal photos. The ones that were there were only of him, wedding photos. No pictures of them together. That he stopped in his tracks. Where are our wedding photos? Amelia's hands clenched at her sides. You didn't like having personal photos displayed. His instinct screamed lie that he turned to face her fully. When did we get married? 2 years ago, she answered quickly. Too quickly. Nathaniel stared her down. Tell me the truth, Amelia. Who are you to me? For a split second, panic flashed in her eyes. But she masked it almost immediately, her expression turning unreadable. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said, I'm the only person who knows the truth about you. Nathaniel's skin prickled at her words. The only person who knew the truth about him? His fists clenched. Then tell me, he demanded. Because I don't remember a damn thing. Amelia hesitated. Her fingers curled around the fabric of her dress, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak. But something held her back. Nathaniel stepped closer. Are you afraid of me? His voice was low, measured. She flinched just for a second before shaking her head. No, another lie. Nathaniel exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. Think, Sterling. Think that she wasn't telling him the full story. Then someone else had to know. The accident, he said slowly. There would have been police reports, medical records, someone outside of this penthouse who could tell me what happened. Amelia stiffened. The reports exist, but you don't want me to see them. Her silence was answer enough that Nathaniel's patience snapped. If I was in a car crash, where's my phone? My laptop? My business associates? Hell, my friends? You expect me to believe that I've been locked away in here for weeks with no one trying to reach me? Amelia's lips parted, but before she could answer, a deep buzz echoed through the room. A phone. His head jerked toward the sound, catching sight of a sleek black smartphone sitting on a nearby table. He lunged for it, but Amelia was faster. She snatched it away, tucking it behind her back. Give it to me. His voice was steel. You're not ready. His jaw tensed. Not ready for what? Something inside him burned with frustration. He wasn't a man who liked being controlled. He knew that much, even without his memories. Who's calling me? His voice dropped to a dangerous level. Amelia's gaze darted to the screen, then back to him. She hesitated. Then, with a resigned sigh, she turned the phone so he could see. Unknown caller. Nathaniel's pulse spiked. A gut feeling told him. Whoever was on the other end of that call held the answers he was looking for. Before Amelia could react, he grabbed the phone from her hand and answered. Hello? His voice was sharp, demanding. The line was silent for a moment. Then, a voice crackled through the speaker, sending ice down his spine. Nathaniel Sterling, you shouldn't be alive. Nathaniel's grip on the phone tightened. You shouldn't be alive. The voice was deep, distorted, like someone was deliberately disguising it. His heart pounded. Who is this? Silence. Then a slow, deliberate chuckle. Cold, calculated. You really don't remember, do you? The voice mused that Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Remember what? You think your accident was just bad luck? A pause. Then the voice dropped to a whisper. Nathaniel, someone tried to kill you. A hit. The room seemed to shrink around him. His fingers dug into the phone. That's impossible, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, doubt slithered in. Was it, before the accident, had he been in danger? Had he known someone was after him? The voice continued. They thought you died that night, but somehow you survived. Now, if you want to stay alive, you need to start asking the right questions. Nathaniel's head spun. Someone wanted him dead. Someone who thought they had succeeded. His throat was dry. Who are you? The line crackled. I'm the only one you can trust. And then, click. The call ended. Nathaniel lowered the phone slowly, his pulse a war drum in his ears. Someone tried to kill me, and he had no memory of it. Across the room, Amelia stood frozen, her face pale that he turned to her, eyes dark. You knew. Her lips parted. Nathaniel, you knew someone wanted me dead. His voice was ice. She exhaled shakily. I was trying to protect you. He let out a humorless laugh. By lying to me? She stepped forward, voice desperate. If they knew you were alive, they would come for you again. Nathaniel's mind raced. How deep did this go? How much had she hidden from him? He leveled her with a piercing stare. Tell me everything. Now. Amelia hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, the night of the accident, you weren't alone in the car. Nathaniel's breath caught. She looked him straight in the eyes. You were with a woman. And before the crash, she told you something that got you killed. Nathaniel's mind reeled. A woman was with me that night. His breath came sharp and fast. Pieces of a puzzle, one he didn't even know existed, were slipping into place. Who was she, he demanded. Amelia bit her lip as if debating how much she should reveal. Her name was Lillian. The name struck something deep inside him. Lillian got a flicker of something. An image flashed through his mind. Dark hair, soft laughter, fear in her eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He clenched his fists. What did she tell me? Amelia hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, she told you who betrayed you. Nathaniel's heart stopped. Then a sharp pain throbbed at his temples. His body tensed, as if his subconscious was screaming at him to remember. She was terrified that night, Amelia continued. She said someone close to you, someone you trusted, was planning to take everything from you. His pulse pounded. Who? A business rival? A so-called friend? Nathaniel took a step forward. Did she survive the crash? Amelia's lips trembled. No, the words sent a jolt through him. She died? His voice was raw. Amelia nodded. The police ruled it an accident. But Nathaniel, what if it wasn't? He swallowed hard. Someone had tried to kill him that night. Someone had succeeded in killing Lillian. His hands curled into fists, and he had no memory of it. Nathaniel locked eyes with Amelia. I need to know everything. She inhaled deeply. Then you need to prepare yourself. Because the truth. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. The person who betrayed you is someone you loved. Nathaniel's pulse thundered in his ears. Someone I loved. His chest tightened. The words clawed at the edges of his fractured memories, but nothing came. Only the dull, maddening ache of something just out of reach. His voice was low, deadly. Who? Amelia hesitated, eyes flickering with something. Pity? Fear? You're not ready, she whispered. Nathaniel stepped forward, his body taut with frustration. I'll decide when I'm ready. She swallowed hard. If I tell you, there's no going back. He grabbed her wrist, firm but not unkind. Amelia, he ground out. Tell me. A war waged in her eyes. Then, finally, Lillian said your brother betrayed you. Nathaniel froze. The room spun. His breath caught in his throat. That M.Y. brother. Flashes of a face. A man with sharp features and an easy smile flickered through his mind. Julian, his younger brother, his only family. No, his voice was hoarse. Amelia flinched at the venom in his tone. Lillian was certain. Nathaniel took a shaky step back. It wasn't possible. Julian had been by his side since childhood. They built their empire together. He trusted him more than anyone, didn't he? Suddenly, something Amelia said before struck him. If Julian betrayed me, why didn't he make sure I was dead? Amelia exhaled sharply. Because someone else saved you. Nathaniel's head snapped up. Who? She hesitated again. Who? Amelia, he demanded. Her eyes locked onto his, and this time, there was no doubt. No hesitation. I did. Silence stretched between them. Nathaniel stared at her. Amelia saved me. His mind was a storm of questions, but one burned hotter than the rest. Why? Nathaniel's breath was unsteady. His own heartbeat felt like the ticking of a bomb. Amelia saved me. He studied her face. The way her lips pressed together as if sealing a secret, the way her hands trembled slightly. Why? He demanded. Why would you risk everything for me? She lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. Because I owed you. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. Owed me for what? She hesitated. Then, she exhaled sharply, as if bracing for impact. Years ago, when Julian came to power in your company, he didn't just plan to betray you. He planned to ruin you. And her voice wavered. I was supposed to help him. The air in the room turned to ice. Nathaniel felt the floor shift beneath him. You were working with Julian? Amelia flinched. I was. But then I realized too late what he was really planning. He didn't just want your company, Nathaniel. He wanted you dead. Nathaniel staggered back. His own brother plotted his death. And Amelia, this woman who had stayed by his side, was once his enemy. Rage curled in his gut. Why should I believe anything you say? Amelia's eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. Because when I saw the truth, I turned against Julian. I tried to warn you that night, but it was too late. You were already on the road with Lillian. Nathaniel swallowed hard. The weight of her confession pressed down on him like an avalanche. You knew Julian wanted me dead. His voice was tight, controlled. And yet you let me get in that car? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I tried to stop you, Nathaniel. I swear. But Julian had everything planned. He sabotaged the brakes. He made sure you wouldn't survive. A sharp pain lanced through Nathaniel's skull. His hand instinctively reached for his temple. The accident. The blood. The blinding lights before everything went dark. Amelia's voice was a whisper now. After the crash, Julian thought you were gone. But I found you first. I hid you. I made sure no one knew you survived. Nathaniel's breath came in short bursts. His own brother had set him up to die. And the only reason he was standing here now was her, his fists clenched. Julian thinks I'm dead. Amelia nodded. Yes. Nathaniel's gaze darkened. A cold fire ignited in his chest. Then it's time to remind him that I'm not. Nathaniel's entire body burned with purpose. His brother, the one he trusted above all, had betrayed him, tried to kill him. And all this time, Julian had been living in his place, running the company, believing Nathaniel was buried in the past. But now, Nathaniel was back, and he would make sure Julian regretted ever crossing him. His jaw tightened. Tell me everything Julian's done since my death. Amelia hesitated. Nathaniel, you're still recovering. Going after Julian now. Now is the only time. He cut her off, his voice steel. He thinks I'm dead. That gives me the advantage. She sighed, rubbing her temple. Fine. After the accident, Julian declared himself the new CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. He told the board that you left everything to him in a will, one he forged. Nathaniel's lips curled into a bitter smirk. Clever, ruthless, but predictable. What else? Amelia took a deep breath. He's been selling off pieces of the company, your legacy, and he's using your name to cover up criminal dealings. Smuggling, fraud, corrupt government contracts. If you don't stop him soon, she trailed off that Nathaniel's stomach twisted. His company, the empire he built from nothing, was being torn apart by the one person he trusted most and no, not for long. Nathaniel straightened. Where is he now? Amelia's expression turned grim. At the Blackwood Gala. Tonight. Nathaniel raised a brow. He's throwing parties with my money? Your money, your company, your name, Amelia said bitterly. Everyone still thinks he's the rightful heir. Not for much longer. Nathaniel glanced at his reflection in the mirror. The scars from the accident were barely visible, his features still sharp and commanding. He might have been gone for a year, but he still looked like Nathaniel Blackwood. Julian had spent all this time acting like he'd won. Nathaniel smirked darkly. Let's see how he reacts when the dead come back to life. Then he turned to Amelia. Find me a suit. We're going to the gala. The Blackwood Gala was an extravagant display of wealth and power. Nathaniel's wealth and power. The grand ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, expensive champagne flowed like water, and the city's elite danced and mingled. And at the center of it all, standing exactly where Nathaniel should have been, was Julian Blackwood. Nathaniel clenched his jaw as he observed from the entrance, hidden in the shadows. Julian had taken everything, his company, his legacy, his life. And yet, there he stood, laughing, shaking hands, basking in stolen glory. Amelia adjusted the cuff of Nathaniel's tailored black suit. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she whispered. Nathaniel smirked. "Julian stole my crown. Tonight I take it back." With that, he stepped forward, out of the darkness and into the light. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. The music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses slipped from hands, shattering on the marble floor. Nathaniel Blackwood was supposed to be dead, but here he was, walking through the crowd with the effortless grace of a man who owned the room. Because he did. Julian, mid-sip of his whiskey, froze. His face paled as his eyes locked onto Nathaniel's. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like he might faint. Nathaniel smirked. "Brother." Julian's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. That's impossible." His voice cracked. "You're dead?" Nathaniel finished smoothly. He took another step closer, his voice a low growl. "I hate to disappoint." The tension in the room was suffocating. The guests watched in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the two brothers like they were witnessing a ghost story come to life. Julian swallowed hard, masking his panic with a forced laugh. Well, this is quite the surprise." He tried to keep his voice light, but Nathaniel saw the fear in his eyes. "Not as surprising as finding out my own brother wanted me dead," Nathaniel said casually, "and stole everything I built." A murmur spread through the crowd. The whispers started, eyes darting to Julian in suspicion. Doubt. Julian forced another smile, but it was strained. "You're confused, Nathaniel. The accident wasn't an accident," Nathaniel interrupted coldly. "I know the truth, Julian. And tonight, so will everyone else." Julian's fake composure shattered. His expression twisted into something ugly. Fear, rage, desperation. Nathaniel leaned in, lowering his voice so only Julian could hear. "You took my company. You took my name, and you tried to take my life." His smirk returned, dangerous and confident. "Now I take everything back." Julian took a shaky breath. "You don't have proof." Nathaniel tilted his head. "Don't I?" Amelia, standing near the stage, pressed play on a remote. The giant screen behind the galla's podium flickered to life. And then, Julian's voice filled the room that a recording. His own confession, his own betrayal. The crowd gasped. The whispers turned to outrage. And Julian Blackwood's empire began to crumble right before his eyes. The video played on the massive screen above the gala, Julian's voice unmistakable as it echoed through the stunned crowd. The confession spilled out like a poisoned river, raw, unfiltered, and damning. "I never cared about Nathaniel. He was always a means to an end. The company, the power, the wealth, it was all for me. He was just in my way." The room went dead silent. Julian's face turned ghostly pale, his jaw clenched so tightly that it seemed to crack. "I orchestrated the accident. I thought if he was out of the picture, I could take everything. The company, the title, the life that should have been mine all along." Julian staggered back, his feet almost giving way beneath him. The room exploded into chaos. Guests whispered furiously, some pulling out their phones to record the moment. A few gasped in disbelief. Others looked at Julian like he was a monster. The once great Julian Blackwood, exposed as nothing more than a liar, a murderer in spirit, and a thief. Nathaniel stood tall, his gaze never leaving Julian's broken face. "You thought you could take everything from me. My legacy, my name." But in the end, he let the words hang in the air, heavy as a tombstone. "You were just too stupid to finish the job." Julian tried to speak, but his voice failed him. His lips parted as if he were gasping for air. You can't do this," he managed. "This is my company, my life." "No," Nathaniel said, taking a step closer, his presence overpowering. "It was mine, and I'm taking it back." Julian's eyes darted around the room, his mind racing for an escape. But it was too late. His world was collapsing. The people who once admired him now turned their backs, disgust written on their faces. Nathaniel turned toward the gathered crowd, who were now watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. His voice rang out, filled with the authority of a man who had been reborn from the ashes. "This man was not my brother. He was a coward, a traitor, and a thief." He paused, looking at Julian one last time. "This is not a company built on lies and deception. This is my company, the one I built from the ground up, and I am reclaiming it." A murmur of approval swept through the room. Whispers of Nathaniel's return filled the air, and the corporate elites began to move closer, recognizing the man who had once led them all to prosperity. Julian stood frozen, his face ashen. His entire empire had crumbled in a matter of minutes. The truth, broadcasted for all to see, could never be undone as security moved in to escort Julian from the building. Nathaniel turned to Amelia, who had been standing by his side, watching the chaos unfold. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice low, determined. Julian was escorted out of the gala, his face twisted with disbelief and rage. The security guards didn't need to say a word as they dragged him through the stunned crowd. Nathaniel stood tall, his arms crossed, watching as his brother, his betrayer, was publicly humiliated. Every part of him longed for justice, for revenge, and tonight he was getting it. But Amelia, standing next to him, didn't seem as triumphant. Her eyes were clouded with concern. "Nathaniel," she began, her voice soft but firm. "You've won, but don't let this victory consume you." He met her gaze, and for a moment, he saw the fear in her eyes. Fear for him, fear for what he was becoming. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice shifting. "I've been so focused on taking back what was mine that I almost forgot." Amelia waited. Nathaniel exhaled deeply. "That I've lost something else in the process." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Julian, he's gone. The company's mine again. But what about me? What about us?" His voice trembled slightly, the weight of everything hitting him all at once. Amelia stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "You're still the man I fell in love with, Nathaniel. The man who cared about something bigger than power." He smiled faintly. "I'm starting to believe that again." They shared a quiet moment, the world around them fading as the tension of the night finally began to ease. The damage had been done, but somehow it felt like the healing was just beginning. Nathaniel turned to face the exit. "Julian can never hurt us again. He'll never take what's ours." Amelia smiled. "You're right. It's time to rebuild. Together." And as Nathaniel stepped back into the light of his future, the weight of the past seemed less heavy. There was so much left to do, so much to reclaim. But for the first time in a long while, Nathaniel felt like the man he was meant to be, complete, whole, and finally at peace. The gala was a turning point. A chapter closed, but Nathaniel knew that his story wasn't finished. The night had been everything he dreamed of: Julian exposed, his company reclaimed, and his reputation restored. But amidst the celebration, there was a void that lingered in Nathaniel's heart. The adrenaline of the night faded, and a quiet truth settled in. Nathaniel had spent so many years chasing power, revenge, and the remnants of a life that had slipped through his fingers. But now that the dust had settled, he was left to face the truth of who he had become. Amelia, her presence had been a constant through all of this. She had never wavered, never doubted him. She had seen through the hardened exterior and recognized the man beneath. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel realized that he wasn't just fighting for money or control. He was fighting for something greater, for the future they could build together. They stood in the private lounge of the gala, alone. The guests had dispersed, the party winding down, but Nathaniel and Amelia remained, the weight of the night settling around them like a thick fog. "Nathaniel," Amelia said softly, breaking the silence. "You fought so hard to get back to this moment. But don't forget," he looked at her, confusion in his eyes, "that sometimes the most valuable things aren't what you can take or reclaim. They're what you've already got." Her words hit him harder than he anticipated. Nathaniel took a step toward her, his chest tightening as he realized the depth of her meaning, that it wasn't about the money, the power, or even his company. It was about the people in his life, the ones who had stood by him through it all. Amelia had been his anchor when the world had tried to drown him. She had believed in him when no one else did. And in that moment, he knew. "I don't want to live in the shadows of the past anymore," Nathaniel said, his voice low and steady. "I've spent too long chasing ghosts." Amelia smiled gently. "Then it's time to create a new future. Together." Nathaniel reached for her hand, pulling her closer. He could feel the weight of everything that had happened, but in her touch, there was a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "I'm not perfect," he said, his voice raw. "I've made mistakes, so many mistakes, but I don't want to make any more. I want to build something real this time." Amelia's smile softened, her eyes filled with warmth. "You've already started, Nathaniel. You just need to believe it." Nathaniel pulled her into an embrace, his heart lighter than it had been in years. They were no longer defined by the past, by Julian's betrayal or the empire they had fought to rebuild. They were creating their own path, a path that was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The days following the gala passed in a whirlwind of legal battles, press conferences, and boardroom meetings. Julian's name was erased from every corner of the company, his legacy tarnished beyond repair. But Nathaniel, guided by a new sense of clarity, knew that the true work had just begun. That he took his seat in the boardroom, the familiar faces of his old colleagues looking to him with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. They had witnessed his return from the dead, and now they would see his vision for the future. That Nathaniel's first order of business was simple. Rebuild. He reshuffled the company's priorities, focusing on innovation, sustainability, and ethical business practices, values he had once abandoned in his pursuit of power. He introduced new initiatives, forged new partnerships, and worked tirelessly to restore the company's reputation not just as a powerhouse, but as a force for good in the world. And through it all, Amelia stood by his side. She was his partner, his equal, and together, they created a legacy that would outlast everything Julian had ever dreamed of. As the months passed, the company flourished under Nathaniel's leadership. But what mattered most to him was the life he was building outside of the boardroom. Amelia became more than just his wife. She became his compass, guiding him through the challenges and triumphs. One evening, after a long day at the office, Nathaniel returned home to find Amelia waiting for him with a quiet smile. There was no need for words. They had built something far more valuable than wealth or success. They had built trust, love, and the promise of a future they could face together. Nathaniel walked toward her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I never thought I'd get here," he admitted softly. "But now that I am, I can't imagine going through life without you." Amelia's eyes sparkled. "And you never will." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the world lifting from their shoulders as they held each other close. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but they had survived. And now, the future was theirs to shape. Nathaniel pulled back slightly, his expression filled with determination. "We're not done yet, Amelia. We've just started." She smiled. "And I can't wait to see where we go from here." Together, they faced the future, no longer haunted by the past, but driven by the possibilities of what they could achieve. The empire had fallen, but from its ashes, a new world was born. And it was one where Nathaniel and Amelia would reign, side by side, building a legacy of their own.